next part. Welcome to part two of our listener questions. Our subscriber Jay asked the question: interviews. How do I get mock interview questions? Well, not to worry, because right now we are going into project management interview questions. And I'm going to be asking you some interview questions that are geared more towards beginner to intermediate. So if you are just starting out in your career and you are looking for questions to help you as you go for those PM interviews, this is a very good video for you to watch. Okay, so take it like a real interview. I'll first of all share the questions. There will not be any answers, and then I will share the answers subsequently. So let's take it like a real interview. All right, here we go. My name's Phil. I'll be your interviewer, and I'd like to welcome you to this organization. First and foremost, can you share with us why you want this position? Now you got to hit the pause button. This is how it works, and answer the question. Hit the pause button and answer. Okay? Next question. What are the 5 process groups in project management? Can you describe each briefly for us? Thank you. Next question. How would you define the triple constraint, and which one do you consider most critical, and why? Next question. What is the difference between a project and an operation? Remember, these are beginner to intermediate. Okay? Hit the pause button so you can effectively answer it. What are the key components of a project charter, and who typically signs it? Next question. Can you explain what a work breakdown structure, WBS, is and why it's important? Next question. How do you begin planning a new project? What is your first step once a project is approved? Next question. How do you define success for a project? Who determines that? Next question. Have you used any scheduling tools like Microsoft Project, Excel, or Google Sheets? How do you track progress? Next question. How would you handle scope creep if a stakeholder continuously introduces new requirements mid-project? Next question. Describe how you prioritize tasks and manage compelling deadlines. Next question. How do you handle a stakeholder that has conflicting goals with another stakeholder? Hit the pause button, my friends. We're not whizzing through these to get to the answers. I want you to practice your answers, okay? Next question. Now, this question is not on the screen, but my question to you is: you walk into a room and you find 3 cups. One is yellow, one is green, and one is blue. Which cup do you pick up first and why? Let's move on to the next question. I know that one threw you off, but that is an example of a critical thinking question, and you should be ready for those. I've had some of those in my interviews. You should be able to think coherently and state your rationale. No answer is wrong, so understand why you chose what you chose and explain it. That got me an interview in the bag, to be honest. So be ready to answer things like that. Okay. Next question. Give an example of how you've communicated a delay or issue to your team or stakeholders. What was their reaction and how did you manage it? Next question. What would you include in a weekly status report to executives? Next question. How do you ensure your project team stays informed and aligned throughout the project? Next question. What is your process for identifying and managing project risks? Next question. Give an example of a project issue you encountered and how you resolved it. Let's move into the concept of leadership. My first question that I'll have to ask you here is, what is your leadership style? And that wasn't on the screen. That is for you to answer ad hoc. Okay. Next question. You're leading a team that isn't meeting expectations. What steps would you take to improve performance? Next question. Have you ever worked with a difficult team member? How did you handle it? Next question. How do you motivate your project team, especially under pressure? Next question. Have you worked in an agile environment? If so, what role did you play in the team, and how was it different from traditional projects? All right, my friends, over the past number of minutes, I have been testing you on basic questions for junior project managers to intermediate project manager roles. Now I will go over some answers, not all, but some answers with you very, very quickly. Here we go. First question, what are the 5 process groups in project management? The answer I would have been expecting from you is initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling and closing. And believe me, I've been to interviews where this question was asked. How would you define the triple constraint? The answer would be scope, schedule, and cost. Or you could say time. Changing any one of those variables affects the others. What is the difference between a project and an operation? Projects are temporary and operations are ongoing. What are the key components of a project charter? Here's the key. Remember, it is all high-level stuff. So it has high-level scope, high-level schedule, high-level cost, milestones, high-level risks, things like that. So at a high level, we can answer purpose, objectives, high-level requirements, high-level risks, summary budget, and sponsor sign-off. Can you explain what a work breakdown structure is? You could give it a very short description and say it's a graphical hierarchical breakdown of the project, showing how all the parts are interrelated. You could say a decomposition of deliverables into manageable work packages. How do you begin planning for a new project? You could say you start by reviewing the project charter and identifying stakeholders. It's all about those conversations with stakeholders as well. How do you define success for a project? I always say success is in the eye of the beholder. So success is all about how your stakeholders view the project. Success is in the eye of the stakeholder. So we talk about meeting objective with scope, schedule, budget, and satisfying stakeholders, most importantly. You got to make sure that your project is fit for use. The products that you create are fit for use and they conform to requirements. Have you used any scheduling tools? Well, you either have or you haven't, and I would highly recommend Microsoft Project. Look on this channel for Microsoft Project Fast Track. It could very well help you. So, Microsoft Project, you could even use Excel for Gantt charts and so on. Smartsheet, there's so many. How would you handle scope creep? Refer to the scope statement and use a change control process. Everything should pass through change control. And change control doesn't have to be big old PMO or portfolio steering committee or change control board. It's all about defining what works for your specific project, but putting it through that change control process. How do you prioritize tasks and manage deadlines? By using priority matrices and collaborating with the team. How do you handle conflicting stakeholders? Facilitate a meeting to align expectations and find a compromise. Work things out together. How do you communicate delays or issues? Clearly, promptly, and with impact analysis and proposed solutions. What do you include in your weekly status report? Progress, completed tasks, upcoming work, risks, issues, and changes. You know, back in the day when I worked in a gaming company, we used a 4-up chart and it had issues, risks, key decisions, milestones, things accomplished as far as milestones are concerned, and upcoming milestones. How do you keep your team aligned? Through regular meetings, clear communication, and shared goals. All right, let's move on. How do you identify and manage risk? Brainstorm, assess probability and impact, and plan responses. But you already know there's a longer answer to that, so you just got to be ready just in case you're asked. But you know it all starts off with planning, risk management, identifying risks, performing a qualitative risk analysis. In some firms, they have a quantitative risk analysis. You got to plan the risk responses, avoid, transfer, escalate, accept, mitigate. Then you have to implement the responses, and then you have to monitor the risk. So just keep that in mind. Okay. All right. Next one says, give an example of a project issue and resolution. So, how did you resolve an issue? You got to think creatively for yourself. A delay in vendor delivery resolved by fast tracking internal work, or a delay in the schedule resolved by fast tracking digging, or a delay in the schedule resolved by collaborating with vendors and stakeholders to find a bespoke solution. You gotta have something, and that's why going into an interview, I highly recommend having your STAR stories: situation, task, action, result. You gotta have STAR stories for people, difficult situations, difficult process, difficult tools. You gotta have those stories ready. And the more you have them ready, the more likely it is you're going to be able to answer questions like this. But you have to practice, you see. So, Jay, thank you for asking the question. Let's move to our next one. How do you handle underperforming team members? Provide feedback, identify root causes, and coach for improvement. Have you worked with difficult team members? Yes. By listening, clarifying expectations, and involving leadership if needed. How do you motivate your team? Well, people have different motivational approaches, but you could say at a high level by recognizing efforts, setting clear goals, and maintaining open communication. Have you worked in Agile, and how is it different? You could say Agile focuses on iterative delivery, collaboration, and flexibility. Two things in Agile: iterative, incremental. You're working iteratively and you're delivering incrementally. So, my friends, over the past 14 minutes, thereabouts, we've been talking about the PM interview, and this is being brought to you as a result of Jay's very thoughtful request which I know is going to help a lot of people. Because I know a lot of you go for these interviews, and the more prep material you have and the more simulations like this, the better it's going to be. At this time, I want to ask if there are any questions I can answer for anyone on the call, because this is the last segment before we go back to Lead Your Comeback. And in Lead Your Comeback, we're going to hear a lot of stories on how to lead your comeback, how to take it up a notch to the next level. So if you have any questions right now, just to timestamp it, 5:25 Eastern. Now be a good time to ask. Any questions?